Okay, so thank you for turning into the Conservation Podcast. This is our third quarter podcast focusing on surface water and geology. And we have with us Mike Leggiero. Mike, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Mike Leggiero. I'm the Chief of Surveillance and Enforcement Section for the Philadelphia District Army Corps of Engineers Regulatory Branch.
Great. Yeah, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And this is Rachael Marques on this side of the microphone, taking over for our previous podcast coordinator. So this month, like I said, we're talking about surface water and geology and how they interact with one another. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started and say, we're going to talk about surface waters. We do a lot of surface water monitoring here, which is great. How do our rivers form? How does geology affect the way that they are formed?
Well, basically, when you're dealing with water and you're dealing with what we call hydrogeomorphology or fluvial geomorphology, more specifically, water basically flows in two types of ways that we deal with. One being sheet flow, just flow across flat surfaces, and then dealing with gravity, water flows to the low spots and you end up getting what's known as channelized flow. And once you start getting into some form of a channel or some constraint, really flow just becomes a continuum, whether you're dealing with an erosion gully coming out of your driveway on the side of the road or the Amazon River basin. I mean, it's all just one form of the same stretch from one end to the other.
Does the underlying geology affect that in any way?
A bit, yeah. When dealing with, especially with channel formation, things like that, you can get into some of the concepts we use in soil science. We use a little mnemonic device, a memory device called CLORPT, CLORPT. And you're smiling like I think you've heard that before.
No, but I'll remember it now.
Okay, well, CL, climate, O, organisms, R, relief or topography, P, parent material, and T, time. Okay, so all of those elements affect how soil forms, but it also affects how channels form because, your parent material, your soil, your slope, the precipitation, the climate, they all come into play in how you form soil, stream channels, all of the above.
Interesting. I'm going to remember CLORPT. Awesome. Well, with that being said, I guess it does affect the way that our rivers form. Does it affect how wide or how large our streams become, how they become rivers, or is that kind of more of like a watershed type approach?
Well, it's kind of all of the above. I mean, again, when you're dealing with channel formation, you have to look at, okay, what's your substrate type? What's your parent material? Are you in sand? Are you in granite? Mm-hmm. Because obviously, yes, you're going to get channels forming more easily in sand than you are in granite. What's your topography going to be? What's your vertical relief? Steep sloped areas are going to have much more erosive forces than, if you compare the Poconos where we are now, my wife and I were hiking this past week and we had a 500-foot vertical gain in 300 yards.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It's very steep. You go down into Delaware and you might have 1 foot vertical change in a quarter mile. Mm-hmm. It's very flat. You're not going to get the same erosive forces. So the size of your waterway is going to be limited by what are the constraints, the size of the drainage area. In steeper areas, you're going to get smaller drainage areas because when you're dealing with development channels, you deal with what's called either gullies or rill, R-I-L-L, rill formation. You can't see it much in the humid Northeast here because of the vegetation, but if you ever see pictures of like some of the mountain ranges in the desert Southwest, okay, if you look at the long line of the ridge, you'll see at 90 degrees, you'll see the gullies going downhill. Yeah. And that's a perfect example of how channels form if you look at that. And so that gives you an idea. And then you just kind of follow that as channels form, they've got small drainage areas, and then channels meet channels, and that forms larger drainage areas until eventually you have the entire drainage basin. And your channels go from small and narrow, shallow, but steep, to wide, flat, and deep.
We do talk a lot about that sometimes in our agricultural programs as well, those rill erosion and disturbed fields and stuff like that. So on a very much Smaller scale for sure, but they do happen a lot in some of our agricultural operations as well.
For agriculture or for just, for erosion and sedimentation control, I mean, it's the same function. You've got disturbed soil, flow ends up exceeding the holding capacity of the soil, and you get erosion.
So while we're talking about our rivers and streams, what determines the stream bed material? So like, for example, here in Pike County, we have several streams that the stream bed could be mostly bedrock. But then we also, I guess the ideal condition for macroinvertebrate life would be, cobble and pebbles and stuff like that. So what influences that or determines?
Again, CLORPT. in all cases refer to it. But again, part of it's going to be your parent material. Okay, what's the water flowing across? Does it pluck anything during it? Is it erodible? Is it not erodible? But also get into climate. Okay, what do you have? Eventually, you get all the stuff that's on the top of the slope. Eventually, will erode, and through a process called mass wasting, rolls down eventually to the channel over geologic time, and all the rocks in the area break up due to freeze and thaw in our area. So all of those same processes that get into soil formation also get into your bed, the formation of what's in your substrate of your channel.
Now that we've kind of talked about like the stream bed and like the big picture stuff, how does the geology affect the quality of our surface waters? Can it affect the quality of our surface waters?
Big time, yeah. And again, it's going to depend on all of the above with CLORPT. I mean, you get into, take for example, where does most of the bottled water we get in this area come from?
I'm not sure.
Quiz for Rachel.
I wasn't prepared. I didn't study.
A lot of it comes from, like a lot of the Nestle plants are down in the Lehigh Valley.
Yeah.
Okay, why are they in the Lehigh Valley? Actually, most of the bottled water from those areas comes from municipal water. It doesn't come from special wells. It comes right from the municipal water because the entire area is karst. It's limestone. As the water flows through, it acts as a natural filter, adds nutrients or not nutrients, but minerals to it, so it has a better flavor. So you got high quality water coming straight out of the ground because of the nature of the bedrock there. As opposed to where I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, where we had strip mines because of all the iron and sulfur from the strip mines. A kid I used to hang out with as kids, he lived on an old reclaimed strip mine, and the water that came in his house had so much sulfur, it smelled like rotten eggs. You could mix it like Kool-Aid 4 times the strength, and you could still smell the rotten eggs over the water.
Wow.
Over the Kool-Aid. So again, substrate, parent material plays a major part in the water quality.
Yeah. Wow, that is wild.
Yeah, it was pretty gross.
Yeah, I'd say. Okay, and then I guess with that, we talk a lot about surface water quality here at Pike County, and when we go out in the streams, we're measuring a lot of different parameters, things like dissolved oxygen, pH, things of that nature, and conductivity, of course, is a big one. Can the geology kind of affect those parameters, and like what we would expect to see in the water due to those effects?
As far as like the organisms and stuff?
Sure. So we look at a lot of macroinvertebrates, for example.
Yeah.
So.
Well, case in point, if you're in an area that, like up here, we've got a lot of acidic water sources. One of the things you're going to find in low pH waters is a lack of mollusks, okay? Because you can't have a calcium carbonate, like a chalk shell, if you've got a low pH. I mean, take a piece of chalk and stick it in some Mountain Dew sometime, or a clam shell. Do the same thing with a clam shell, stick it in Mountain Dew, and you're going to see what happens to clams in that environment. Whereas if you get down into, again, the Lehigh Valley, something with an alkaline limestone base, that's why you've got a lot of trout in those areas, as opposed to, well, we actually have a lot of trout up here too, but.
No, that makes sense. We do tend to have a very low alkalinity in Pike County, and then we do also tend to have, like you said, a more acidic pH, so we lean a little bit less than 7, usually like 6 or so. Yeah.
The other thing that can happen is a lot of times is a lot of people don't realize that the gills on insects and fish isn't just for transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide. It's also for transport of other ions, both from the blood and from the water back into the organism. So if you've got I don't know, say high salinity or whatever, that can affect, mess with the osmotic pressure within the organism's gills and be favorable or not favorable depending on the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's actually something that we've been looking at a lot. The Isaac Walton League, I don't know if you've heard of them in their work, but they're making a big push for looking at how our salinity or our saline inputs are affecting the water quality and therefore the organisms within it. And there are also some work done trying to compare the conductivity changes associated potentially with increases in the salts that are being put in the water. So
Okay.
there's a lot of work being done on
road salt, you mean,
yeah,
for the most part?
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. So the calcium chloride and sodium chloride, and there's a lot of work being done right now on making those inferences. So,
Okay, neat.
yeah. So changing gears a little bit here, we've been talking a lot about streams and rivers and that kind of surface water, but onto some of our other surface waters. We have a lot of lakes and ponds and wetlands in our areas as well. So how do lakes form, and what's the difference in this process?
Lakes can form in a lot of different ways. And again, get back to CLORPT. Yeah, no, you can, some of the lakes that we have in this area are of glacial origin. I mean, 10,000 years ago when the glaciers receded, you left a big block of ice with a hole in the ground, and eventually it melted and formed a lake. But you can have beaver ponds forming on waterways, so you've got your organism from CLORPT, your O, covered there. Beaver ponds. You can get, not really here because we have high vertical relief, but you get further down into lower elevations, and you can start getting things like oxbow lakes forming. You get a back channel cut off of a meander in a waterway. So the channel blocks off with sediment or debris or something like that, and you get a lake beside the channel forming. And I can't think of any in the U.S., but like Lake Baikal, it's the deepest lake in the world in Russia. It's on a tectonic rift.
Oh wow.
Okay, it's I forget how many. It's like 1,000 miles long or something, and I can't even remember how deep it is. But it's the world's deepest lake, and it's because of two tectonic plates separated and dropped a big block of rock, and everything flowed into that big hole. So
wow, that's very cool. We do have a lot of beaver activity. Our ecosystem engineers
and then you have the Corps of Engineers putting dams on things.
and of course Lake Wallenpaupack here is formed via dam. So
actually, most of the lakes in this region are actually artificial, man-made.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's more common than you would think. A lot of times we see smaller dams creating these smaller ponds, and it's really interesting. Yeah. So I guess people can also be ecosystem engineers who are creating a lot of these lakes as well.
We're an organism. So
yeah.
I think that's fair.
So we come to you a lot here at the Conservation District for wetland information as well. Does geology affect wetland formation and composition, or whether it's, I know it can sometimes be dependent upon the source of the water. Does that kind of have a role to play as well?
Yeah, totally. I mean, again, I teach wetland and riparian ecology as well at a local college. But one of the places I take my kids is a lot of people think that wetlands always form at the bottom of the hill, which, again, water flows downhill, and it's a logical place to find it.
Sure.
But if you look at a lot of the wetlands we have around here, if you look in the hydrogeomorphology classification, they're slope wetlands. And now, how would you get a wetland forming on a hillside if water flows downhill? You get it because the underlying substrate, if you've got the hill at, say, 45 degree, if you get to the bedrock underneath it, the bedrock is at some kind of a lower angle, and it shoots the water straight out the side of the hill. So some of our wetlands are what we call a C slope, which is greater than 8% grade, 8 foot out of every 8 foot rise in every 100-foot run, which is really steep. But you can have wetlands on the sides of mountains simply because the underlying rock strata prevents the water from infiltrating. So the water has nowhere to go, and if it's flowing within a foot of the surface, that's where you get wetlands forming.
Wow. Wow, that is interesting. Definitely a shocker for me. Like you said, I would expect wetlands to be generally at a low point, but that's so interesting.
You do get them there too.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. Okay. And then we've talked about wetlands last year on our on the road program and some of our Science on Taps, but we briefly get into the classification of wetlands. So whether it's a bog, a swamp, a marsh. Can you talk about that a little bit and how like maybe the geology may or may not affect how that water's getting in there?
Sure. As far as, well, a bog is typically derived from glacial origin. And generally, it's a big hole in the ground, and the classic example of a bog is a hole in the ground that has only precipitation going in, no infiltration, no flow through from streams, and very little input from groundwater. Okay, so it's precipitation driven, as opposed to a fen, which most of what we have around here are fens because you've got flow through with streams. It's a hole in the ground, but a stream runs through it. Then you can start getting into, you get formation of marshes both away from waterways and adjacent to waterways, and same with swamps. I mean, the difference between marshes and swamps has to do with marshes have herbaceous vegetation, swamps have woody vegetation. At least in the States. It's actually reversed in Europe. They call things with trees marshes and things without trees swamps. But at least here in the U.S., swamps have trees. But again, some of those are, if you look at like bottomland hardwood swamps, like you get down in the southeastern U.S., like Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, those are, go down to Maryland to the Pocomoke River, beautiful bottomland hardwood swamp next to rivers, okay, within the floodplain, the riparian areas. So again, geologically, it has to do with being adjacent to a large channel feature. Whereas up here, a lot of our swamps have to do with shallow bedrock, just preventing water from draining. And that's where we get like a lot of our hemlock swamps and rhododendron swamps. Okay,
awesome. So last month we had alluded to the connection and the interaction with surface waters and groundwaters, and how sometimes they will feed one another depending upon the conditions, like precipitation and so on. Does the underlying rock structure around a surface water affect how the groundwater and the surface water interact with one another?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And again, it ends up being that some wetlands, for instance, are considered to be discharge wetlands as opposed to recharge wetlands. Okay, you have a discharge wetland where water collects within a catchment up in the surface, and whether it, not necessarily through a channel, but it infiltrates and comes down to the toe of slope where you have like an artesian spring, and the water discharges out into the wetland or into the water body. But the other type is you get a catchment, you get a pond where water collects, and then it actually slowly discharges into the groundwater. And I mean, so you think of, if you go out into the plain states, the Ogallala Aquifer, which is like the largest aquifer, and it's mainly where the water source comes from for most of our farming in the Midwestern states. That's actually geologic water. It's actually fossil water. It's water that was actually put in the aquifer thousands to millions of years ago, and we're using it at a rate much faster than it's being recharged. And then you get into, like you talked about, like does the water affect what lives there? Well, part of drawing up that water, as they're drawing that water from the ground and using it for spray irrigation, they're accumulating salts in the soil. So eventually using that too much will then end up changing the conditions that the crops can grow on, to the point where you may no longer be able to grow crops in what was previously very fertile land.
Wow, that's interesting, yeah.
That's pretty heavy, yeah.
Great. Well, that was all of the questions that I had for us today. Was there anything else that you wanted to highlight, or?
Not particularly, no.
Okay,
thanks.
Fair enough. All right. Well, that was all I had for this edition of the Conservation Podcast. Stay tuned in next quarter for our final podcast of the year. And thank you again to Mike Leggiero for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.